Welcome to History for Year. This is the unit number 3. That's the Industrial Revolution. Before working, check the words you have on screen and please compare with the words you know. If there are words, English words that you don't know their meaning, please write down on your notebook the translation into Spanish. We are going to study a very long process. It's a process that started in the 18th century and finished at the end of 19th century. It's called a revolution because changes that happened were really deep. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain and is divided into two stages: the First Industrial Revolution and the Second Industrial Revolution. The First Industrial Revolution started around 1760 due to a demographic revolution and an agricultural revolution. Demography depends on two rates. One is the mortality rate and the other one is the natality rate. Before the 18th century, both of them were very high. That means the population grew but slowly, very slowly. High natality rate, but at the same time high mortality rate. Nevertheless, in the late 18th century, mortality rate decreased, and the natality rate, of course, was high. Obvious result of this was population started growing. The death rate decreased due to several reasons. First one was the nutrition improvement. Advances in agriculture increased the production of food, and this better nutrition made people more resistant against illnesses, of course. Second, personal and public hygiene. Street plumbing made the streets cleaner, and there was a better access to clean drinking water. And cotton clothes became more usual because they were easier to wash and the use of soap at the same time widespread. Third reason was the public health. Edward Jenner discovered the vaccine against smallpox, and that was the cause of millions of deaths before, and now these deaths can be prevented. Fourth reason, epidemics. These epidemics became less frequent, as in previous times. This thanks to the nutrition improvement and better hygienic and public health. Then this increase of population meant more demand of food and clothes, and as a consequence that brought an agricultural revolution. This agricultural revolution was at the same time thanks to the improvement in technology. Farming techniques evolved from the 3-field system of crop rotation to the 4-field system, also called the Norfolk system. This one, the 4-field system, eliminated the field that the 3-field system left fallow. The traditional 3-field system meant that the land was divided into 3 fields. One field grew winter cereal, wheat or rye, another one grew beans or lentils, and the third one was left unplanted. That means fallow. The 4-field system, on the other hand, meant that the land was divided into 4 fields. One field grew wheat, another one grew turnips to feed livestock, the third one grew barley to feed people and or animals, and the last one grew clover to feed livestock too. Using this system, the 100% of the land is productive, as opposed to the 3-field system of rotation that left the 30% of the land completely unproductive. There were other factors with influence on this agricultural revolution. One of them was, for example, the end of the feudal system, the common work in the lands of the lord. After the liberal revolutions, you remember 1820, 1830, 1848, land that previously belonged to the nobility and the clergy became private, and bourgeoisie bought these lands and, of course, put them into production. The livestock quantity increased as a result of the 4-field system that produced fodder, that's food for animals, and the animals produce manure to fertilize the land. I don't have to explain to you what the manure is, right? If you don't know that word, please check in a dictionary. Technology had an influence on the agricultural revolution. For example, the iron plough replaced the wood plough, and later the work was mechanized. Seeders, threshers, harvesters, etc. The 18th century was a period of growth for the agriculture production. English farmers used their savings from the selling of their products to invest in trading activities, invest in industry, or just banking, or sometimes just reinvest in primary sector. In Britain, the economy had an important growing, not only because of the agricultural revolution, but due to other several factors. Markets. Britain had an important international and domestic trade. Its domestic trade benefited from a good infrastructure and lack of tariffs. And the international trade was based on the large colonial empire that provided cheap raw materials. Profits from trade were invested in the new industry. New mentality. British bourgeoisie and nobility were in favor of investing in trading and taking business risks. The parliament issued laws to support trade and business at the same time. Iron and coal. Britain was rich with iron and coal, and both elements were necessary to build and run the factories. The iron was used to build the factories, the machines, and the railway network. And the coal was the source of energy of the steam engine that powered machines, powered trains, and boats. The First Industrial Revolution. During the 18th and 19th century, a transition happened. It's the transition from artisan activity to industrial activity. So let's study the difference between them, what the industrial activity is and what the artisan activity is. Artisans, or craftsmen, use tools to make their products, whereas workers in industries used machines. Artisans worked in workshops and industrial workers in factories. Workshops were just rooms aimed to make products by hand, whereas factories hosted more workers and big machines. There were places where the industrial activity was concentrated. Usually they were places rich in coal and sometimes with a good water or ground transport infrastructure. The first machines were powered by hydraulic energy, but James Watt invented the steam engine in 1765, powered by coal, and then the hydraulic energy was replaced. The artisanal and industrial manufacturing process were completely different. Artisans used to make the products from the very beginning of the process to the end, but the industrial system created a new way, the division of labor. According to this system, each worker specialized in a single task in the process. Workers should work at speed required by the machines.
Work specialization, sometimes called a division of labor, refers to the degree to which an organization divides individual tasks into separate jobs. Work specialization, also called a division of labor, allows a manager to take complex tasks and break them down into smaller, more precise tasks that individual workers can complete. Each employee is trained explicitly on how to best perform one small, specific task. Over time, that employee becomes extremely proficient and effective at performing that task. This allows every employee in the organization to be an expert to some degree. For example, Mary assembles the frame. Bob adds the sides. Aaron paints the product. Josh checks that the product is complete. And Jack prepares the product to be shipped. The entire development process is extremely complex and made up of several specialized steps. When these steps are divided among individual employees, it becomes far less complex. The product is finished and ready to be sold after each employee completes his or her respective task in the product development process. If one employee were responsible for the entire product development process, the results would be far less efficient and extremely time-consuming. Advantages of work specialization include each employee can be an expert to some degree, Task refinement by the specialist leads to higher levels of productivity. Work can be completed faster and more efficiently due to specialization. Quality control costs are lowered due to specialization. Gives employees a sense of pride and job security due to their specialized skills. And all of the previously stated could lead to higher profit potential. Disadvantages of work specialization include specialization limits the ability to multitask. Employees are isolated and limited to performing small, repetitive, and at times boring tasks. Specialized workers have a smaller skill set than employees who are not specialized, making it harder to find work opportunities outside of that job. Employees are rarely challenged to do anything more than what they've always done, leading to burnout. When an employee leaves the organization, they take their specialized knowledge with them. Limited cooperation and communication among employees, and coworkers cannot fill in for employees when they are absent, potentially limiting the amount of work that can be done without the specialized employee. The advantages of work specialization include employees can be an expert to some degree in their specific tasks, higher levels of productivity, lower quality control costs, job security for employees due to specialized skills, and higher profit potential. The disadvantages of work specialization include limiting the ability to multitask, isolating and limiting employees, smaller employee skill sets that can exist only when the employee is working, and limited cooperation and communication among employees.
The division of labor produced an economic improvement because it brought different consequences. Textile industry developed very fast in England, thanks to the British colonial empire and the technology that improved processes. Colonial empire, the colonies, provided raw materials, cotton for example, for the textile British industry, and inventors provided technology to improve all the processes. James Hargreaves, Richard Arkwright, and Samuel Crampton developed mechanical spinners. John Kay and Edmund Cartwright developed a flying shuttle and a mechanical loom to improve the weaving. These machines made the system of production more efficient, but the real expansion started when machines became steam-powered. Britain flooded international markets and that increased other economic activities. Textile products demanded other raw materials, and workers demanded food from the agriculture sector, and at the same time the machines used in the textile production demanded an improvement from the iron industry. The Industrial Revolution wouldn't be possible without the iron industry. Iron was first imported from Sweden at really high costs, but since 1709 was produced in Britain thanks to the invention of the blast furnace by Abraham Darby. This furnace smelt iron using products derived from coal. That was great for Britain because they avoided bringing to the island the very heavy and expensive iron from Sweden. They just replaced it using coal, and coal was really abundant in Britain. In 1783, Henry Cort invented a more powerful furnace to produce wrought iron that is easily bent in order to make chains or nails. The economic theory used during the old regime was replaced by a new one, the liberalism. Economic liberalism was an ideology based on the theories by Adam Smith in his book The Wealth of Nations. This theory says the economic activity should be ruled by the principle of economic freedom. According to this, we need freedom for, first, to create companies, second, to hire workers, and third, to set the prices of our products. Freedom lets the economy adjust itself, so the intervention of the state is not necessary. Adam Smith called this way of adjusting the invisible hand. Actually, the invisible hand refers to the fact that prices and costs of production, salaries, are regulated by the law of the offer and demand. The more offer we have, the less prices we get. And just the opposite. The less offer we have, the higher prices we get. So according to the theory of Adam Smith, exactly if there is a high supply of products or labor, and of course low demand, prices and salaries go down. On the other hand, if supply is low and demand is high, prices and salaries just rise. For example, imagine our group in class. We are in our beloved history lessons, I know you love it. And then we have only one student producing pens for everybody. Everybody needs a pen to write down our notes, right? So imagine we have only one producer, but everybody needs this pen. That means we have only one producer, and that means a very, very low offer. And everybody needs a pen to write, so that means a very, very high demand. The problem is this one can ask a very, very high prices because he cannot produce a lot of pens. That means prices will rise. On the other hand, imagine we have 10 or 15 people producing pens. That means the offer of pens will be higher. And of course, they will compete one among the others. So they have to lower prices just to convince us to buy the cheapest one. That's the invisible hand. With the agriculture and industrial revolution, a transport revolution happened. This transport revolution was necessary because the factories needed raw materials, and at the same time markets needed the manufacturers created in these factories. So this transport revolution will provide both of them what they need. Roads and canals were built since 1770, and river transport, of course, widely used. Thanks to the steam engine, Robert Fulton created the first line of commercial steamboats. Before Fulton, water navigation used boats powered by wind or animals, but they were very, very fast. They were replaced by these steamboats. Anyway, clipper ships continued sailing seas, and they were definitively replaced when the British Empire guaranteed the existence of harbors with supplies of coal for the long routes between Britain and colonies in America, Africa, and Asia. The other field where the steam engine was used was the ground transport. Railway was invented thanks to the steam engine powering locomotives and the iron used to build trains and railways. George Stephenson invented the first steam-powered locomotive in 1814 to transport coal. In 1825, the first cargo railway line was built, and 5 years later, the first public transport railway line between Liverpool and Manchester. The railway became one of the most revolutionary ways of transport, because it made possible to get goods to their markets in a cheap, safe, and efficient way. The railway had a great impact on industrialization, because it needed coal for working, so it promoted mining, and it needed iron to build railways and trains, so it promoted the iron industry too. This new way of transport was so important that spread very fast through the entire world. Spain's first line of railway transport was built between La Habana and Güines in 1837. In the Iberian Peninsula, the first line was Barcelona-Mataró in 1848. Long-distance railways were built, such as the Trans-Siberian Railway connecting Moscow and Vladivostok, 9,288 kilometers, or the Southern Pacific Railroad in the United States, 21,739 kilometers. Imagine these travels at the usual speed gathered at the 19th century, more or less 70-60 kilometers per hour. And then you must travel 10,000 kilometers without air conditioning nor heating. Social and economic impact of the transport revolution. Trade. The transport revolution reduced times and costs, so the trade was highly improved and people traveled easier. Specialization. Thanks to the transport, the industrialized countries made and exported manufactures, whereas the colonies provided raw materials for industrialized countries. Mining and iron industry. Coal, iron, and other metals were needed to power the locomotives and to build railways, trains, and steamboats. Daily life. Great amounts of people started migrating thanks to the easier and faster ways provided by long-distance trains and steamboats. At the same time, food was transported longer distances, and that meant an improvement in people's nutrition. Around 1870, a new phase of the Industrial Revolution took place. It was called the Second Industrial Revolution. At this time, the international economy grew really fast. Coal was the main source of energy, but two new sources developed really fast. Electricity, used to power the industrial machines, underground trains, and city trams, and new forms of communication, telephone, radio, and cinema. Petroleum, that became a key source of energy when the combustion engine was invented and used to power automobiles. If textile industry was capital during the first industrial revolution, now the iron and steel, chemical, and electricity were the main industries. Iron and steel industry were important to develop the railway connections, the construction of factories, and industrial machines, and the war industry. Heavy guns, warships. When Henry Bessemer patented the Bessemer converter in 1856, a chemical process to produce large amounts of steel at a low price, this industry expanded widely. Chemical industry grew very fast thanks to the use of petroleum and rubber. Pharmaceutical products, synthetics for the textile and the automobile industry, and the dynamite developed the economy related to this industry. The new source of energy, the electricity, was produced in hydroelectric and coal and petroleum powered plants and distributed on a large scale. During this second industrial revolution, Britain is not the main industrial power. Now the United States and Germany are becoming industrial powers too. And this is the origin of the future horrors the humanity suffered and we are going to study. Before the Industrial Revolution, workshops were ruled by a single family. But at the same time the industry and the economy are growing, these companies are getting bigger and bigger, and they need more money to be invested to build bigger factories and bigger machines. So there is a lack of money. Not a single family can afford that. So they started creating corporations. In corporations, the property of the company is distributed among more owners according to the number of shares each one has. Shares were traded on the stock market, and anyone could buy them and participate in the company as a shareholder. Imagine you have a company and you produce smartphones for your classmates. Of course, you can provide one group, perhaps the entire high school, with your smartphones. But imagine you are expanding your business and then you have the possibility of providing the entire country. You must provide all Spain with smartphones. You need an investment. You need more money to create a bigger factory, perhaps a couple or 3 factories to produce the amount of smartphones you need. So, how can you get the money to do that? To start building this factory, to hire more workers? You have 2 options. First one, you can ask a bank. Ask for money. Bank will give you a loan, but this loan you must pay back. You have to pay back plus interest. Okay? Second option, you can distribute the property of your company. You can talk to other people and say, okay, my company is not my company, only mine, not anymore. We are distributing the property. But I have the majority of property and rest of people just a very, 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 very small quantity of property. That means I take the decisions, I'm still the main owner, but I'm not alone. There are more people. These more people get a very, very proportional, very short, very small, proportional profit from our economic activity. Of course, I get the majority of the profit, but these people provided me with money. If there are a lot of small owners, there are a lot of small quantities of money. If there are providers enough, with this money, I can build this new factory or factories and etc. Second industrial revolution was the moment of the creation of these large companies, and this will be the origin of the financial capitalist system. Banks became key institutions because they were intermediaries between private individuals and companies by lending money from individuals to the companies. People's savings then were invested by banks in industry and other business. New systems of production increased dramatically the economy during the 19th century. Taylorism. This is a production process based on the division of labor system, but now the production process is divided into small tasks that were timed. The workers were highly specialized in this specific task, and they were paid according to the work they completed. It was invented by Frederick W. Taylor. Assembly line. This production process, based on Taylorism, improves this by passing products from one worker to the next along an assembly line. The worker didn't waste time between tasks. It was invented by Henry Ford. Mass production. Consequences of the use of the assembly line was the capacity of a really large production of goods with reduced production costs. It was made by manufacturing a lot of identical parts of an item. Later, all the different parts were brought together in order to assemble the final product. We are talking now about a really large scale of economic activity. Usually it involves international, at high rate international exchanges. Corporations became corporate groups to get enough capital and to achieve this large scale of production. The different types of corporate groups were cartel, This is an association of companies in the same line of business to control production, distribution, and prices. It is a way of limiting the competition and, as a result, a decreasing in prices. Holding company. It is a company that acquires the majority of shares of other companies just to control them. Trust. This is an association of companies to cover all the stages in the manufacture of a product, to control the market, and to eliminate competition. Now imagine our companies, our students' companies, to produce smartphones. If they create a cartel, that means these companies, these 10 students, 10 companies producing smartphones, these 10 companies make an association, and then they agree quantity of production, distribution, and prices they are going to ask. So according to this agreement, they eliminate competition, and of course they eliminate the lowering of prices. A holding company is, for example, if one of these companies, one of these students, buys in the stock market, buys the shares of the other companies, and then they control these companies. So, for example, they can decide the other companies to produce less quantity of smartphones, then his company, his origin company, can produce more, or the other companies, they can make them to produce low quality smartphones. So of course he is going to sell more in his origin company. And a trust is the association of these companies, these makers of smartphones, with the other companies that provide raw materials, for example the plastic, batteries, other components, so they can control the process from the beginning to the end. And for example, the costs of production are not altered because of the plastic producer asks for more money, for example, or higher their prices. Now they control the production from the very beginning, from the extraction of raw materials to the end, to the final manufacturing of the process. Governments had to pass laws to regulate these corporate groups to prevent the creation of monopolies that are unfair for society. If your classmates, few of them, control the entire market of smartphones, you will have to pay everything they ask for. So that's unfair. Someone has to regulate that. The most famous industrial revolution happened in Britain, but also it happened exactly the same in other parts of Europe and in other parts of the world. Belgium. In Belgium there were an abundance of coal and a tradition of artisans, plus a government support for railway building. French private people and companies invested in Belgian coal mines, and then they developed iron and steel industries and textile production. Germany. The German territory, since the customs union, Zollverein in 1834, had a big domestic market with an active economy. The state promoted the industrial development, and the agrarian nobles and industrial bourgeoisie made an agreement to promote the economic development. The main industries were iron and steel. France. Although industrialization took place, it was less important than the British one. Problems for a fast industrialization of France were the existence of many small independent farmers who did not produce an agricultural revolution, the importance of traditional artisanal activity opposed to the industrial activity, and the slow population growth. Sweden. Sweden benefited from its important iron industry. United States. The United States was a very new state, but it became a great industrial power thanks to several factors. First, abundant land and scarce labor that led into a fast mechanization in agriculture. Abundant natural resources, iron, coal, and petroleum. Specialization in production. The north of the United States industrialized quickly, supplied by cotton from the agrarian southern states and food from the west. A large domestic market. United States was a very large country, and the government promoted the construction of a railway network to connect the territory. Innovation. United States was a new country and adopted new solutions, so innovation was really usual. New systems of production, new types of companies and corporations, technical advances. It was an isolated country, because of political and cultural reasons, but everything changed during the Meiji period, since 1868 to 1912. The Emperor, Meiji Tenno, decided to end feudalism and make Japan an industrialized country. In this way, the industrialization was driven by the state. Russia. The state, the Tsar, absolute monarch of Russia, invested in heavy industry, and at the same time in the railway. The effects of industrialization. The 19th century was a time of population growth. European people became from 200 million people in 1800, they became 400 million people in 1900. They doubled their population in just 100 years. Causes for this population growth were the decreasing death rate and the high birth rate. Better food supply, plus medical advances, plus improvements in public hygiene made possible this decreasing of death rate. There were notable improvements such as better sewage, rubbish collection, better quality of drinking water, better working conditions. The birth rate was high, like in previous centuries, and the economic advantages of the Industrial Revolution made possible that people got married younger and then started having children earlier, and consequently, more people. The mechanization of the agriculture work made possible farming the land with less quantity of workers, so many peasants migrated to cities in search of work. The urban population in Europe was the 10% in 1800 and increased till the 40% in less than a century. It was the beginning of the urbanization of Europe, but this increasing population, was too high for the European cities, so plenty of these migrants had to leave the country, just to migrate to other countries and to other continents. Transport revolution played a key role in this process. 6 million people left Europe between 1800 and 1924. Up to 1870, most migrants were British and Northern Europeans. Between 1870 and 1924, many migrants were from Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, and Turkey. Main destiny was America, but Australia and New Zealand were usual too. Most of British and Irish people went to the United States, Australia, or New Zealand. Spaniards emigrated to Argentina. French people to Canada. United States was the country that received the majority of migration, 60% of European immigrants. The class system. The French Revolution altered the society, but it was actually during the Industrial Revolution where society was profoundly changed. From states determined by birth, now we will have social classes determined by wealth. Now we have three social classes: the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. The upper class consisted of the aristocracy and high bourgeoisie. The middle class were formed by low bourgeoisie, that's tradesmen, shopkeepers, artisans, teachers, mid-level government officials, lawyers, army officers. And the lower class was formed by industrial and agricultural workers. Legally, they can move from one class to another one, but actually it wasn't so easy. Although there was legal and judicial equality, everybody was judged by the same laws and courts of justice, in practice, the economic inequality separated people depending on their wealth. And of course we are talking about male people. Women were completely subordinated to male. Their fathers, brothers, husbands. The upper class, formed by the aristocracy and high bourgeoisie shared certain characteristics. The aristocracy or nobility started paying taxes since the old regime system was abolished, but they held leading positions due to their wealth. They held property of large lands, as we know. The bourgeoisie is getting more and more power, because industrialists and bankers belong to this social group. They encourage a new mentality, the bourgeoisie values. These values consisted of hard work, savings, family life, and religion. Bourgeoisie people lived in comfortable homes in new neighborhoods on the outskirts of cities and enjoyed leisure activities following the aristocracy example. Concerts, opera, theater, horse racing. The middle class were owners of property, but they were less wealthy than the high bourgeoisie. They shared with the high bourgeoisie of the upper class the bourgeoisie values, because they consider work and savings as the key to acquiring wealth. This middle class supported reforms to be part of the political life. Lower class was the majority of population. Here we can find peasantry, house servants, and the proletariat. Peasants were a diverse group. There were owners of land, day laborers, and serfs. Owners of plots of land were usually in northern and western Europe, whereas day laborers who worked for owners of large lands were typical from south of Europe. In Eastern Europe, especially in the Russian Empire, existed serfs working under very hard conditions. Industrial workers were known as proletariat because their only wealth was their own labor. The term proletariat comes from the Latin word proletarius, and that means the one who doesn't have other properties than his children. Proletarians exchanged their labors for a salary. They performed low-skilled tasks and received low salaries. They used to be illiterate because children left school at a young age to start working and support their families. This lack of education made very difficult moving from one social class to another one. House servants had better living conditions than other members of the lower class because they lived in houses where they worked in. Nevertheless, they received low salaries, and they had only one afternoon off a week and worked more than 12 hours a day. The new society created after the Industrial Revolution was really unequal. The workers, industrial workers, lived and worked under very hard living conditions, but very soon they started organizing themselves to improve their way of living. The labor movement was formed by the groups of workers organized to pressure factory owners and governments. There were different ways of pressuring. Ludditism. It was a movement based on the destruction of factory machines. According to Luddites, the workers lost their jobs due to new technologies that replaced the skilled workers. From this point of view, of course, the elimination of machines will solve the problem, because owners of factories will need to hire again workers to work if they have no more machines. Chartism. This movement was a pacifist one and with political goals. It was called Chartism because the movement presented a People's Charter to the British Parliament demanding labour rights and universal suffrage. At that time, workers couldn't vote. So the goal of having the right to vote, the universal suffrage, was an important one because it's the first step to gain more and more power, representation in the parliament, and later power to decide and get better living conditions and better working conditions. Trade unions. During the 19th century, people did not receive any help from the state in case of sickness, accident, death, or just the end of their working life at an elder age. So, workers formed mutual aid societies to help members in case of illnesses or unemployment. It was difficult at the beginning because the right of association wasn't allowed until 1824. Since 1824, workers replaced their mutual aid societies for trade unions. These trade unions were associations of workers demanding better working conditions, higher salaries, shorter work days, end to child labor, shorter female work days, etc. The way they put pressure on owners of the companies were the strike. Workers refused to work until certain demands were met. Philosophers considered this new society and this new economy the same way the Enlightenment thinkers criticized the old regime. The German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published an important essay in 1848, The Communist Manifesto. According to this work, society was divided between oppressors and oppressed, and it existed a class struggle between them. Before the Industrial Revolution, oppressors were the nobility and clergy because they owned the means of production. After the Industrial Revolution, the bourgeoisie is the new oppressor class. Peasants were the oppressed during the old regime, and industrial workers during and after the Industrial Revolution. Marx and Engels solved the problem of this unfair society by one way. That's the revolution. According to Marxism, after the revolution there would be a stage of proletarian dictatorship, just to eliminate the enemies of the workers. Once the revolution was secured, the new society will be created without classes, social classes, and without private property. At that point, the state would disappear because, of course, it won't be necessary. Political parties with social goals were created since 1875. They were the socialist parties. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and Mikhail Bakunin founded a new ideology, anarchism. The anarchism believed in workers' self-organization and opposed any form of state. They believed in collective use of property, rejection of political parties and elections. But they shared with communists the way of achieving their goals. That's the revolution. Labor organizations tried to unify an international way of working. So they created the first International Workingmen's Association in 1864. But it failed due to disagreements between anarchists and socialists. 25 years later, socialists created the Socialist International to coordinate Marxist labor organizations.